What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And this week we're going to be looking at a deck that honestly probably has a claim to being one of the best graveyard decks in the format in terms of the resiliency to graveyard hate and the ability to kind of play around it and play like this weird game plan where, your usual reanimation target is actually a pretty castable card in the grand scheme of things and pretty good on rate on its own. But without further ado and without giving away too much, let's take a look at the Abzan Greasefang deck for the Pioneer format. So here we have the Abzan Greasefang deck piloted by Mr. underscore Richard 93. Took it to a 5-0 finish in a Pioneer League on August 15th. But before getting too far into the deck, and honestly it looks really clean cut from what I can see already. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It's an easy way to support my content. Keeps me making videos, and I just love seeing that subscriber count go up because I'm doing a lot of things that I love doing, and as a competitive player myself, I feel like this makes me a better player, and in turn, I can help other players get better as well, no matter how minute that betterness, I guess, actually got. Also, be sure to join the Discord as well. I have the link in the description of the video if you want to just talk magic and stuff like that. It's pretty kind of bare bones for the most part, but the sentiment is all the same. Just in there decent amount of time when I'm off work, so it's really cool. It's been a lot of fun interacting with people. But without further ado, let's go ahead and look at the Abzan Greasefang deck. For people that don't know, Greasefang is the namesake of the card. Namesake of the deck is the creature Greasefang, Okiba boss. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you return a vehicle from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, and you return to the owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So you play basically the best vehicle that you could crew with Greasefang, and that's the Parhelion 2, which is an 8 mana, 5/5 legendary artifact vehicle with first strike, vigilance, and flying. And whenever it attacks, it creates 2/4/4 angel tokens with flying and vigilance that are attacking. And of course, crew is 4. Conveniently enough, Greasefang has 4 power, meaning that when you get the Parhelion back at the beginning of combat, you stay within the beginning of combat step if you're playing on Moto, or you just announce that before you declare attackers in paper. You crew up the Parhelion with the Greasefang. You're able to attack for 13 points of damage in the air, and of course leave 2 angels back to block. They're going to be very tough to deal with, even with like the removal given to the format. Like they could just take care of both of them, but the deck has plenty of ways to just kind of like keep putting the Parhelion back into the graveyard, which of course we're going to look at in this deck. And this deck list is pretty clean cut. We're looking at 4 Supplier, which mills 3 cards whenever it dies or it enters the battlefield. Just a good chump blocker to blunt some early assault, while also filling up your graveyard, hopefully trying to hit Parhelions. Also to note that we are playing a card called Can't Stay Away, which flashes back for 5 mana, but if you do happen to mill like Greasefangs, you just can't draw them. Can't Stay Away is a way that you can get back Greasefangs, which in turn can get back Parhelions or Iska's Chariot, and kind of get the ball rolling from there. You also have Rafine's Informant, which is your way of getting a Parhelion or a Iska's Chariot out of your hand. Of course, Connive being that you draw a card and you discard a card, and if it's a non-land card, discard it this way. The creature gets a +1/+1 counter. Um, really just a card that can probably trade in combat, but the real upside to it is getting to connive and put a Parhelion or an Iska's Chariot in the graveyard on turn 2, then obviously, hopefully playing a Greasefang to bring it back. Satyr Wayfinder, kind of another way doing it, like from Rafine's Informant. You look at the top 4 when it enters. You put a land card from your hand, from among them into your hand, and you put the rest into the graveyard. Obviously, you met like a Parhelion or something like that. You can get rid of it, hitting the land, trying to hit your 3rd land to play the Greasefang. Which all the creatures 4 ofs, 16 spells, 4 Thoughtseize. Um, there's a decent amount of like combo being played. Like the Lotus Field combo deck is pretty is pretty prevalent along with like the mono green like mid-range decks and things like that. Like Thoughtseize is just a very powerful card against those decks that are trying to assemble a critical mass of either permanents or relevant spells to kind of go off and try to win the game. And Thoughtseize can hopefully disrupt them long enough to where you can just put a bunch of power into play and kill your opponent super early. Can't Stay Away, a card that we went over. For 2 mana, you can get a 3 mana value creature or less from your graveyard. If the creature would die, it gets exiled instead. Can't Stay Away gives it that. And then, of course, flash it back for 5 mana if you happen to mill it with any one of your other cards that just mill things. Grizzly Salvage, probably your best, I would say, 2 mana play because it is just a roided Satyr Wayfinder that you can do at instant speed. You look at one additional card and you get the benefit of putting a creature or land in your hand. So if you already have the third land rolled up, Grizzly Salvage can grab you the Greasefang or maybe like a Rafine's Informant to then be able to ditch the Parhelion or Isika's Chariot, so on and so forth. Obviously has the more utility, being harder to cast instead of like one generic. You do have to have a black, but obviously, for this deck being mostly like green black splashing the white, not going to be too big of a deal. Lastly, we have Witherbloom command, which is one of the commands that really doesn't see play in any format, but it does see play here in Abzan Greasefang. Getting a player to mill 3 cards and then returning a land from the graveyard to their hand, destroying a non-creature or non-land permanent, with mana value 2 or less. Uh, Target creature gets -3/-1, and then target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Um, some of these modes are pretty good. Obviously, you just getting to mill and then hopefully pick up a land, but then also like getting like a Tormod's Crypt or some other form of graveyard hate, hitting like Pithing Needle to stop people from naming like Parhelion, things like that. Just a card that does give you a lot of utility, and it being a 2-drop, just kind of fitting in there on curve to where you can play it before having a Greasefang and kind of like setting up the way for you to put Parhelion or Iska's Chariot in play. And so the last 8 spells in the deck, the 4 Parhelion, which you just went over, Iska's Chariot, dominating standard, and I believe even historic as well for a time. Enters, you get 2/2/2 cats, and whenever it attacks, you create a copy of target token that you control. Chariot being pretty well with the like angels in particular, because obviously you can crew the chariot with one angel and then attack with a chariot, make another angel. Um, but just Isika's Chariot getting to stack up just like cats is also very good too. Um, just overall, probably like a very good like equipment or vehicle in terms of like value for the mana cost, and just a card you could play on like turn 4, and it's still pretty good. Just kind of gives you an out necessarily to you can reasonably cast the Parhelion, like it going back to your hand, and you just make land drops for the rest of the game. You are able just to like kind of like stall your opponent, make them focus on hitting the graveyard, and then they have to answer the Parhelion. They hit the battlefield from you casting it. Chariot just kind of gives you that like earlier game, like yeah, Greasefang getting back Parhelion is like the game plan, but like turn 4, if you're not really set up for that, or maybe your hand hasn't really come together, or you've just bricked really hard on milling, Iska's Chariot does a very good job of cleaning up as well. The mana base a little less cut and dry than the spells, but Blooming Marsh, Concealed Courtyard, 4 ofs. They're the fast lands from the Kaladesh set. Uh, just a painless way to give you the mana that you need on the early turns of the game are going to come into play untapped um, up until turn 3, and then obviously turn 4 if you've been hitting the land drops are not going to. But a painless way nonetheless to get the mana that you need to be able to cast the spells, because this deck does want as much time as it can get to kind of set up and obviously eventually kill your opponent, but also not dying to some of the more aggressive decks. We have cards like Darkboar Pathway, which you can obviously choose the green or black side, whichever that you need at the time. I recommend when you are playing cards like these that you play them as close to last as possible, because they're going to come into play untapped no matter what side you play them on. And you basically want to make sure that like with the side that you're playing this on gives you access to the colors that you need, maybe not something that you need right away. Like maybe playing this on black isn't such a good idea when you have cards like like a basic swamp and like a concealed courtyard when you could just play it on green. So just a tip. Nothing I guess like super groundbreaking, but definitely something to keep in mind if you choose to play this deck, or really any deck that is playing like Pathways. I generally like playing these cards at the last possible moment, unless I absolutely need whatever amount of mana on like the turn that I'm playing it. Uh, one Godless Shine, three Overgrown Tomb, four Temple Garden. Shocklands are obviously just the staple of the Pioneer format. You're playing eight total. Just another way to effectively fix your mana and give you untapped mana when you need it. Um, Obviously, your life total is pretty irrelevant, I would say, against like the control decks and maybe even some of the other combo decks. So like this is also like another source of like untapped mana, getting you the colors that you need. Finally, we have Swamp and a Takanuma Abandoned Mire. Uh, Takanuma just being able to get back like a Greasefang is another way of doing that. Can also be picked up by like Witherbloom Command found by Satyr Wayfinder and things like that. So I definitely have access to multiple Greasefangs throughout the deck with the can't stay aways, obviously the Grizzly Salvages being able to find them, and then like the Takanuma to be able to pick it up, and then being able to rebuy the Takanuma within your spells while also giving you some extra utility is pretty good, and obviously the one of is like perfect for this deck. The sideboard, three duress. Um, Obviously the control matchups. Anybody that are trying to bring in like their graveyard hate and stuff. Most of the graveyard hate that is in the format, if not all of it, that is played pretty heavily, is going to be hit by duress. Uh, can bring this in, taking out some of your other stuff. Obviously as you do when you sideboard. To kind of help out because obviously going up on discard spells against like some of the combo decks and stuff can be pretty crucial, especially when decks are just trying to race you at that point. Fatal Push, more so for like the creature matchups. You don't really want Thoughtseize in like aggressive matchups necessarily. At least I prefer not to have them just because normally when you're trying to top deck, they're pretty bad, and Fatal Push just always has the utility of killing most of the creatures that are available in the format that most aggressive decks will play. Decay and Assassin's Trophy, again, just kind of getting rid of some of those annoying permanents that could stop you from maybe reanimating and or activating the abilities of certain things. Um, just again giving them more utility, more removal, and things like that, and at an efficient rate at that. Unlicensed Search, Graveyard Trespasser, just some tools that you get against some of the graveyard decks, where like Graveyard Trespasser kind of like races pretty well, very hard to remove because it's just an immediate 2-for-1 on your opponent. Getting you to gain life and eat multiple cards out of your opponent's graveyards whenever it attacks or enters the battlefield. Unlicensed Hearse is also going to be a house as well. Just eventually gets so big that it puts your opponent into the abyss, and honestly can be pretty early in the game too, depending on like the matchup. Hearse definitely has its spots where it just shines, and you could really just go almost all in on a Hearse. And if you're able to clear the way, one or two attacks can end the game with this card. And that's it for the deck. That's the Abzan Greasefang deck. Overall, I like the deck. It's definitely a deck that you can steal games in game one, or where you're really hoping to be favored slash win game one and trying to steal like game two or game three. And I think this deck does have some tools to be able to fight through some of like the hate and stuff. Like this deck doesn't just fold to one or two pieces of hate. It can eventually just kind of power through and plow through. Um, yeah, just a sweet deck. Definitely worth playing. I've run into it a few times. I've definitely played some matches against it, and it can be very frustrating to play against because a lot of the time they can just like turn 3 Parhelion, and turn 3 Parhelion is very hard to beat if you are not a combo deck. And I found that combo decks really have a very good time against like the Abzan Greasefang deck, as long as the Greasefang deck go like actually goes for it on like turn 3, and you're able to win on the fourth turn of the game, which is very doable with some combo decks. But let me know what you think in the comments of this. Let me know in the comments of this video about this deck. My brain is like absolutely scrambled. But yeah, let me know in the comments how you feel about this deck, if you want to see it in a future video. Of course, if you enjoyed the video and you want to see either more of this deck or more deck techs like this, please leave a like on the video, and of course consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell for the channel. Helps me out a lot, lets me know what people want, and just in general it makes me a happy man. I can always dig that. As always, thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.